In the first episode about the glorification of our bodies, we saw that it is the will of God that our bodies will be glorified. He even made us to be glorified. Paul was speaking about this, and today I want to look at a very important question. To whom did Paul speak? And to whom were the letters written? Why is this important to understand? Because we have to know the timing of this glorification. To whom we can apply this glorification. Was it in the first century? Is it something in the future? So that's the question. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 15 verse 51 again. Paul says, "Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed." To whom did Paul speak? He says, "Listen, I tell you a mystery." The letter was written to the Corinthians in the first century. I tell you, Corinthians, a mystery. We, the Corinthians, will not all sleep. We will not all die, but we will all be changed. Paul did not speak to the Americans in the 21st century. Paul did not speak to Chinese people in the 21st century. Paul was speaking to the Corinthians in the first century. Another example, Romans 13, verse 11 and 12. It's Paul again, and he says, "And do this," he's talking about love, "do this, understanding the present time." The present time, the hour has come for you to wake up from your slumber. The hour has come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. Paul and the Christians were waiting for full salvation. The work of Jesus at the cross was just the beginning. The day of Pentecost, when the Spirit was poured out on the believers, it was just the beginning. But the full salvation was yet to come. So he says, our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. Verse 12, the night is nearly over and the day is almost here. So Paul and the Romans and the Corinthians and all the Christians in the first century were expecting full salvation, were expecting the fullness of Christ in us, the fullness of the Holy Spirit in us. So, the first century Christians were living in the so-called end times. The Bible calls it the end times. In 1 Peter 4 verse 7 we see this concept again. We see it a lot of times in the New Testament. The end of all things is near. Therefore be clear-minded. The end of all things is near. The end time. They were living in the end time, the end of an old age, the old order of things, the old covenant age. And the new covenant was breaking through. So that's why they call it the last days, the end time. It were the last days of the old covenant and the new covenant, the full salvation, full glory, fullness of Christ in us, fullness of the Spirit in us, and the glorification of our bodies. It was expected in the first century. Acts 2, verse 16 and 17. It's the day of Pentecost, and the disciples of Jesus were filled with the Holy Spirit. And Peter says, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. In the last days. And Peter says, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. These are the last days. It's very simple. The end time, the last days, it was in the first century. And the first century believers were expecting the fullness of the glory. In later episodes, I will talk about Jesus' own words about the end time, about his coming again, his presence. But for now we see the question about the audience has been answered. The audience, the people, Paul and Peter and so on, were talking to, were the people of the first century. And they expected the glorification. What does this mean for us in the 21st century? Well, it's very simple. The glorification, the fullness of salvation, the fullness of Christ, of God in us, is possible right now. Because it has been released in the first century. Again, in later episodes I will talk more about the first century. It's a very important topic to understand, because when we don't understand this fact, we will still wait for those things to happen in the future. And that's of course a great danger, because we will still live in an old order of things when we believe fullness of salvation, the coming of Christ, glorification still have to happen. So the glorification is possible for everyone.